Hello, romance lovers. If you're a fan of Werewolf shifter romance audiobooks, you're in for a treat. This audiobook is packed with everything you crave: thrilling action, sizzling chemistry, and an irresistible alpha male at the center of it all. Whether you're here for the intense romance, the danger escape twists, or the supernatural allure of a gripping paranormal romance, this audiobook will have you hooked from the very first moment. It's the perfect escape into a world. So, grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let this steamy werewolf romance audiobook sweep you away. I promise it'll be an experience you won't forget. Press play, get comfortable, and let this werewolf shifter romance audiobook sweep you off your feet. Happy listening. Chapter 1: The Spark. The moment I stepped into my new apartment, I could practically hear my dad's voice. "Emma, you're really going to pay this much for a shoebox?" "Sure, the place was small. The third place was small." "Okay, tiny, but it was mine. The single window barely let in any light, the walls were a washed-out beige, and the radiator rattled like it had a personal vendetta against my sanity. Still, to me, it was a castle, a very, very compact castle." I dropped my suitcase with a thud, scattering my sketchbooks across the floor. My hand brushed against one of my favorite designs, a sleek red gown with an open back that screamed confidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Considering my current wardrobe consisted mostly of thrift store finds and a stubborn pair of sneakers that had been through too many subway rides. "Okay, Emma," I muttered to myself, plopping down on the floor because, well, I didn't have a couch yet. "You made it to New York. Now it's time to prove you belong here." My phone buzzed as I started peeling off the packing tape on my first box. "Kit, tell me you're not still unpacking," her voice chimed through the speaker like a caffeinated bird. "Because, babe, tonight's the night." "For what? Realizing I have no furniture?" I glanced at the empty corner where my dining area was supposed to be. "No," Kit said, dragging the word out like I'd just insulted her. "Tonight's the night we celebrate your big city debut. I found this party downtown exclusive, fabulous, and full of hot people. You're coming." "Huh," I groaned, clutching a roll of bubble wrap like it might protect me from Kit's enthusiasm. "Kit, I start work tomorrow. Maybe I should, not show up looking like I partied with a rock band." "That's the point. You're starting tomorrow. New job, new life. You've got to set the tone. Trust me, nothing screams I belong in New York like showing up slightly hungover but very fabulous." I hesitated, glancing back at my scattered sketches. On one hand, I had a mountain of unpacking to do. On the other, Kit had a point. Moving here wasn't just about chasing my career. It was about finding the braver, bolder version of myself. I sighed dramatically. "But if I embarrass myself, you're never picking the venue again." Kit squealed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Babe, trust me. By the end of the night, you'll be thanking me." By the time Kit barged into my apartment an hour later, I had managed to dig out exactly 2 things from my suitcase: a pair of mismatched socks and a half-eaten granola bar. "Please tell me you're not wearing that," Kit said, eyeing my yoga pants and oversized hoodie like they were offensive to her very existence. "Relax, I haven't picked yet." I gestured to the pile of clothes I'd dumped on the bed, which, in fairness, was more chaos than options. "Besides, this is Brooklyn. Isn't the vibe supposed to be grunge chic?" Kit didn't dignify that with a response, so instead, she dove into the pile like a treasure hunter, emerging seconds later with a slinky black dress I'd completely forgotten I owned. "This is perfect." She held it up triumphantly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Pair it with those heels you bought for your cousin's wedding, and you'll look like $1,000,000. Or like I'm about to fall flat on my face," I muttered. But I couldn't argue with her judgment. Kit had a knack for turning even my thrift store finds into runway withered ensembles. After what felt like a lifetime of poking, prodding, and Kit insisting that less eyeliner is more, I stood in front of the cracked mirror by the door. The woman staring back at me looked different, like she belonged here, in this city of dreamers and doors. Look bad, I admitted, giving a little twirl. I look shiny. Kit grinned, grabbing her purse. You look unstoppable. Now let's go show New York what Emma Carter is made of. As we walked out into the bustling streets, the city buzzed with energy, like it knew something exciting was about to happen. I wasn't sure what the night had in store, but for the first time, I felt ready to find out. The party was like something out of a movie, only the kind where the main character feels completely out of place. It was held in a chic loft in Soho with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a glittering view of the Manhattan skyline. The air buzzed with conversations that ranged from art gallery gossip to startup funding pitches. Everyone seemed to belong here, except for me. I hovered near the edge of the room, clutching a glass of champagne like it was a life preserver. My sleek black dress, Kit's pick of course, helped me look the part, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone could see right through me, as if my Brooklyn address was stamped on my forehead. Will you relax? Kit nudged me, effortlessly sipping her cocktail. She looked completely at ease, like she'd been born for places like this. You're acting like someone's going to card you for being here. That's because I feel like they should, I muttered, scanning the crowd. This place is intense. It's fabulous, Kit corrected, gesturing to a group of people laughing near the bar. And so are you. Own it, babe. Before I could argue, she vanished into the crowd, leaving me alone with my bubbling insecurities. I took a deep breath and glanced out the window, pretending to admire the skyline. That's when I felt it. A pair of eyes on me. I turned, and there he was. Tall, dark, and unfairly handsome. He stood near the bar, holding a glass of something amber and expensive-looking. His suit was tailored to perfection, the kind of suit that said, "I'm important, but I don't need to tell you why." He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching the room with an air of quiet confidence that made him stand out even more. And then, his eyes met mine. For a moment, the noise of the party seemed to fade. There was something in the way he looked at me, curious, amused, like he could see right through my carefully constructed, cool exterior. My heart did a little flip, the kind I hadn't felt in, well, forever. It wasn't until I realized he was walking toward me that I snapped out of my daze. Oh no, he's coming over. Play it cool, Emma, play it cool. Champagne? He asked, nodding toward my glass, his voice smooth and deep. I glanced at my almost empty flute and shrugged. I guess it's a party requirement. His lips quirked into a half-smile. And here I thought you'd picked it for the taste. Honestly, I'm just hoping it makes me look like I belong here, I admitted before I could stop myself. Smooth, Emma, real smooth. Instead of laughing, he tilted his head, like he found my honesty refreshing. Well, for what it's worth, you wear it well. Thanks. My cheeks warmed and I took a quick sip to cover it. And you? Are you a regular at soirees like this, or are you just really good at pretending you fit in? His smile widened, and suddenly the room didn't feel so intimidating anymore. A little of both, I suppose. And you? Definitely pretending, I said, a hint of a grin tugging at my lips. For the next few minutes, we fell into easy conversation. He asked about me, not the polite, surface-level questions, but ones that made me feel seen. Where was I from? What brought me to New York? What did I dream about when I was a kid? And, somehow, he made me forget to be nervous. Forget about the fact that I didn't know his name, or why he seemed so interested in me. I didn't even realize we were dancing until I noticed the faint strains of music, and the way his hand fit perfectly against my lower back. "You're good at this," I said, glancing up at him. He was taller than I'd expected, and his dark eyes sparkled under the string lights. "Dancing?" "Making a girl feel like she's the only person in the room." He didn't answer immediately, his gaze dropping to mine in a way that made my breath hitch. "Maybe that's because you are." There's a moment, a split second, where you know you're about to make a decision that doesn't align with the safe version of yourself. That moment hit me square in the chest when he leaned in, his voice low and magnetic. "Let's get out of here." I blinked, caught between the champagne bubble swirling in my head and the electric pull of his gaze. "Excuse me?" "This party," he said, gesturing lazily to the glamorous crowd like they were part of the furniture. "It's loud, predictable, but you're none of those things. Come with me. Let me show you something better." A laugh bubbled out of me, half from nerves, half from disbelief. "You don't even know me." "I know you're different," he said, his lips curving into that infuriatingly confident smile. "And I know you're curious." Am I wrong? I hated how easily he saw through me. I also hated how right he was. The room, once so intimidating, now felt small and suffocating compared to the possibilities shimmering in his dark eyes. Every logical part of me screamed bad idea, but the other part, the one that had dragged itself to New York in search of adventure, was already reaching for my clutch. "Fine," I said, trying to sound breezy even though my heart was racing. "But if you turn out to be a serial killer, I am blaming Kit for convincing me to come tonight." His laugh was warm, unguarded. "Deal, though I should warn you my hobbies are a little less dramatic." "Good to know," I muttered as he guided me toward the elevator. The weight of his hand lightly grazing my lower back sent a spark up my spine. The elevator ride was the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable but charged, like we were both waiting to see who'd blink first. I focused on the glowing floor numbers, but my mind was running a marathon. Who was this man? And why on earth was I trusting him? "Relax," he said as if he could hear the questions buzzing in my head. "You're going to have fun, I promise." "Fun?" I echoed, stealing a glance at him. "I don't even know your name." He turned to face me fully, and for the first time there was a flicker of something softer beneath his confidence. "Alex?" "Alex," I repeated, tasting the name like it might give me some clue about who he was. "Nice to meet you, Alex. I'm Emma," he said, like he was testing the sound of it too. "Now that we're properly introduced, let me ask you something. When's the last time you did something completely spontaneous?" The elevator dinged, and I followed him into the lobby, my heels clicking against the polished floor. "Spontaneous? You mean like agreeing to leave a party with a total stranger?" His grin was maddening. "Exactly." We stepped out into the cool night air, and the city wrapped around us like a glittering cocoon. Alex led me to the curb where a sleek black car was already waiting. The driver nodded as Alex opened the door, holding it for me like a perfect gentleman. "Where are we going?" I asked, hesitating for a fraction of a second before sliding into the leather seat. "You'll see," he said, joining me and closing the door with a soft click. The car pulled away, the city lights streaking past the window like a living painting. I felt the hum of the engine beneath me, the thrill of not knowing where we were headed. It was reckless, completely unlike me, and yet I couldn't stop smiling. I glanced over at Alex, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. "What?" I asked, self-conscious under his gaze. "Nothing," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "You just seem like the kind of person who's been waiting to do something like this." I snorted. Oh, you mean abandon all logic and jump into a car with a guy I just met? Yeah, definitely top of my bucket list. He chuckled, shaking his head. No, I mean something unexpected. Something you'd never let yourself do before. The words hit me harder than they should have. He wasn't wrong. Moving to New York had been my first big leap, but this was uncharted territory. And for once, I didn't feel like pulling back. Well, I said, leaning into the moment, guess there's a first time for everything. He tilted his head, as if studying me. I like that. The car slowed, and I realized we'd arrived. Where exactly, I wasn't sure. Alex stepped out first, offering me his hand as I followed. The street was quieter here, lined with trees and softly glowing street lights. It felt like a pocket of the city that belonged only to us. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Not even a little," I admitted, but my hand stayed in his, and as he led me down the cobblestone path, I decided that maybe, just maybe, stepping out of my comfort zone wasn't so bad after all. The moment Alex opened the door, my jaw practically hit the floor. If I thought the penthouse from The Devil Wears Prada was luxurious, this was its overachieving cousin. The space was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the glittering Manhattan skyline like it was custom-built just for him. Soft, ambient lighting highlighted sleek, modern furniture in muted tones of cream and charcoal, and a glass spiral staircase wound up to a second floor like something out of a futuristic dream. "Ooh, this?" Alex said casually, noticing the way I froze just inside the doorway. "It's just something I threw together last weekend." I blinked, realizing I'd been standing there, gawking, like a tourist seeing Times Square for the first time. "Right," and I just casually knitted the Brooklyn Bridge. He laughed, and I could feel the sound settle somewhere in my chest, warm and disarming. "Come in. I promise it's less intimidating after a glass of wine." I stepped inside, the soft click of my heels on the polished floors feeling almost disrespectful. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and something expensive I couldn't quite place, definitely not take-out leftovers and grocery store candles like my apartment. My eyes caught on a massive abstract painting hanging above the fireplace, all bold strokes of black and gold. "This place is..." I trailed off, searching for a word that wouldn't make me sound like an overexcited interior design blogger. "Over the top," he offered, shrugging as he poured wine into 2 glasses. "Intimidating," I corrected, accepting the glass he handed me. His lips curved into that infuriatingly confident smile. "You get used to it." "Do you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I glanced around again. "Because I feel like if I lived here, I'd constantly wonder if the furniture was judging me." He "Trust me, the view gets old after a while." I glanced at the skyline, twinkling like a million tiny promises. "I find that hard to believe." "Then you haven't been here long enough," he said, motioning toward a plush gray couch. "Come on, sit. Tell me why someone like you was hiding in the corner of that party." I sank into the couch, immediately regretting it. Not because it wasn't comfortable. It was too comfortable, like it was trying to seduce me into confessing my deepest secrets. I sipped my wine, trying to focus on the rich, velvety taste instead of the man sitting way too close for my brain to form coherent thoughts. "What makes you think I was hiding?" I asked, tilting my head to meet his gaze. He smirked. "You're wearing a dress that could stop traffic, but you spent half the night pretending to be fascinated by the view. Either you have a thing for skyscrapers or you didn't want to be there." "Maybe I just didn't want to talk to anyone," I shot back, though my voice lacked the edge I was aiming for. "And yet here you are," he pointed out, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "Talking to me." I set my glass down, suddenly feeling exposed. "I just moved here," I admitted, hating how small my voice sounded. Tonight was my best friend's idea. She thinks I need to put myself out there. I threw in air quotes for good measure. And what do you think? I think I'm more of a stay-in and watch movies kind of person. He nodded, like he understood. Let me guess. Romantic comedies? I narrowed my eyes at him. What's wrong with romantic comedies? Nothing, he said quickly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. They're just predictable. Boy meets girl, they fall in love. Cue the grand gesture and happily ever after. Predictable doesn't mean bad, I argued, crossing my arms. Sometimes it's nice to know things work out in the end. His smile faded, replaced by something quieter. I used to think that too. The shift in his tone caught me off guard. What changed? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. Life has a way of reminding you that nothing's guaranteed. People leave, things fall apart. The endings aren't always happy. I didn't know what to say to that, so I settled for honesty. That's depressing. He laughed softly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sorry, didn't mean to bring the mood down. I shook my head. No, it's okay, I get it. Moving here felt like that for me, like I was leaving everything behind, not knowing if it was the right choice. You left home to come here? He asked, leaning forward slightly. Yeah, I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. It's what I've always wanted, to work in design, to be part of something bigger. But it's scary, you know, starting over, not knowing if you'll measure up. You will, he said simply, like it was a fact, not a compliment. The certainty in his voice caught me off guard, and I felt a blush creep up my neck. You don't know that. I do, he insisted, his gaze steady. You're here, aren't you? That says a lot. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded, letting his words sink in. For the first time since I'd arrived in New York, I felt like someone saw me. Not just the polished, trying to fit in version, but the real me. Thank you, I said quietly, and for once, I meant it. He smiled, leaning back against the couch. Anytime. It started with a spark, one of those unspoken moments where the air feels charged, and you're not sure whether you're dreaming or living. Alex had leaned just a little closer, his hand resting casually on the back of the couch, his fingers almost brushing my shoulder. The space between us felt smaller than it was, and the look in his eyes, intense and searching, made me forget how to breathe. You have no idea how fascinating you are, do you? He said, his voice low and rough, like he was speaking a secret meant only for me. I laughed, a nervous sound that caught in my throat. Fascinating? That's a stretch. I think you've had one too many glasses of wine. I haven't even finished my first, he countered, a small wicked grin tugging at his lips. And that grin? It was trouble. The kind of trouble you know you should stay far away from, but find yourself walking toward anyway. Well, if you're expecting me to believe that, you might need to work on your delivery, I teased, feeling bold and out of my depth all at once. He laughed, but it didn't stop his hand from moving, just slightly, brushing against my shoulder in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. It was such a small touch, but it felt deliberate. You don't believe me? He asked, his voice soft but with an edge that made me want to lean in closer. Let's just say I'm skeptical, I replied, but the words came out quieter than I intended, my resolve melting under the weight of his gaze. The moment stretched between us, thick and warm and heavy with something unspoken. The city lights glimmered behind him, but I couldn't focus on anything except the way his eyes locked onto mine, like he was daring me to look away. He said, and it was the first time he'd said my name like it meant something, like it wasn't just a name but a question, a possibility. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he closed the space between us, his hand slipping to my cheek, his touch warm and steady as he tilted my face toward his. For a split second, I thought I might stop him, but then his lips found mine, and all my second guessing went up in flames. The kiss was soft at first, gentle and careful, like he was testing the waters. But then it deepened, and any shred of logic I had left evaporated. His hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as I melted into him. My fingers found their way to the front of his shirt, gripping the fabric like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. He tasted like wine and something darker, something intoxicating, and I couldn't get enough of it. "Is this okay?" he murmured against my lips, his breath warm on my skin. "Yes," I whispered, surprised by how much I meant it. He smiled against my mouth, and the way he looked at me made my chest ache, like I was something rare, something he couldn't quite believe was real. The world outside faded as he pulled me to my feet, his hands firm and steady on my waist. I let him guide me up the spiral staircase, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. When we reached his bedroom, I froze for just a moment, my nerves catching up with me. But then he turned to me, his expression so open, so unguarded, that I felt the last of my hesitation slip away. "You can tell me to stop," he said softly, his hand brushing my hair back from my face. "I don't want you to stop," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, the space between us disappeared. The night unfolded like a dream. One of those vivid, surreal dreams where every touch, every kiss feels magnified. The sheets were cool against my skin, contrasting the warmth of his hands as they traced every inch of me. He was attentive, like he was learning me by heart, and it wasn't just physical. It was more than that. It felt like he was seeing all the parts of me I usually kept hidden, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide them. I didn't know how long the night lasted. Time seemed to lose all meaning as we fell into each other, again and again, until the only thing that existed was us. The sound of our breaths, the rhythm of our movements, the way he whispered my name like a promise. When it was over, I lay tangled in the sheets, my head resting against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath my ear, and I felt a strange sense of peace, a calm I hadn't expected, but didn't want to let go of. "You okay?" he asked, his fingers trailing lazily down my arm. "Yeah," I said, my voice soft and drowsy. "More than okay," he chuckled, a low, content sound that made my chest warm. "Good." We stayed like that for a while, the silence between us comfortable and easy, and as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this city had more in store for me than I'd dared to hope. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the smell, clean and expensive, like cedarwood and linen, not the faint whiff of takeout pizza and cheap candles I was used to. For a moment I didn't move, letting the memories of the night before trickle in like sunlight through the sheer curtains. Oh, my God. I turned my head slowly, half hoping last night had been a very vivid dream, but there he was. Alex. Still asleep, his face relaxed in the kind of peaceful expression that made him look less like the confident, magnetic stranger I'd met, and more human, vulnerable even. I should have stayed in that moment. I should have just soaked in the fact that I'd spent the night in a penthouse with a man who kissed like a dream and looked like he belonged on the cover of a glossy magazine. But instead, my brain went straight to panic mode. What are you still doing here? This was supposed to be a one-night thing. You have a job to start today. Quietly. So quietly I should have gotten a medal for stealth. I slid out of the bed, wincing as the cool air hit my bare skin. My dress was crumpled on the floor, a stark reminder of last night's reckless brilliance, and I grabbed it as quickly as I could, trying not to think about how ridiculous I probably looked sneaking around like a thief in heels. Leaving so soon. I froze mid-snap of my bra strap, my heart leaping into my throat. When I turned around, Alex was propped up on one elbow, his hair adorably rumpled. Oh, I scrambled for an excuse, but my brain decided to short-circuit under the weight of his sleepy, smirking gaze. I have work, new job, big day, first impressions and all that. He chuckled, the sound low and warm, and somehow even more dangerous than when he was fully awake. You don't have to sneak out like a criminal, I wasn't sneaking, I lied, shoving my feet into my heels and grabbing my clutch from the floor. You were definitely sneaking, he said, his smirk widening into a full grin now. Okay, fine, maybe I was sneaking, I admitted, throwing my hands up. But in my defense, I didn't want to wake you. You looked so peaceful. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but he didn't push it. Instead, he sat up fully, the sheet sliding dangerously low on his hips. At least let me call you a car. I'm good, thanks, I said quickly, waving him off as I backed toward the door. I've got this whole subway thing figured out. Very New Yorker of me, don't you think? His grin softened into something more genuine. Emma. Ew. Good luck today. The sincerity in his voice stopped me for a second, my hand hovering on the doorknob. Thanks, I said, my chest tightening in a way I didn't have time to unpack. For everything. And then I was out the door, my heels clicking against the pristine marble floors as I made my way to the elevator. By the time I stepped onto the street, the morning air was crisp and cool, the city already alive with its usual hum of energy. I paused for a moment, looking up at the towering building I'd just left, a little dazed and a lot exhilarated. What the hell had I just done? A part of me wanted to text Kit immediately and spill every detail, but another part, the part that knew today was a big deal, reminded me to keep my focus. Last night had been magical. Reckless, yes, but magical. Still, I had a career to start, and if I wanted to make a name for myself in this city, I couldn't afford to get distracted. As the city buzzed around me, I couldn't help but smile. Last night I'd stepped out of my comfort zone, and this morning I felt like a different version of myself, one I liked. And maybe, just maybe, New York liked her too. The building towered over me, a sleek, glass monument to ambition and dreams. The golden letters spelling out "Read International" shimmered in the morning sunlight, and I was 99% sure they were mocking me. I smoothed down the front of my blazer for the 10th time. I'd worked hard to get here. Late nights sketching designs in my tiny apartment, caffeine-fueled study sessions, and enough rejection emails to wallpaper an entire room. But here I was, day one at Read International. No big deal, I told myself, my stomach doing cartwheels. Just the first day of the rest of your life. The receptionist greeted me with a smile so polished it could have been in a toothpaste ad. Welcome, you must be Emma Carter, design team, right? That's me, I said, trying to sound confident even though my voice came out a little too high-pitched. We 8th floor, she said, handing me a sleek visitor badge. Take the elevator on the left. They're just about to start the morning meeting. The elevator ride was a blur of soft music and frantic internal pep talks. By the time the doors slid open, I'd convinced myself that I could handle anything, or at least not trip over my own feet. The design floor was everything I'd imagined and more. Open, airy, and buzzing with creative energy, workstations were scattered with mood boards, fabric swatches, and sketches pinned to corkboards. It smelled faintly of fresh coffee and that subtle metallic tang of ambition. I spotted a cluster of people heading toward a glass-walled conference room and quickly fell in line, hoping I wasn't already late. A tall woman in a perfectly tailored blazer glanced back at me, her eyes sweeping over me like a barcode scanner. "You're the new junior designer," she said, her tone clipped but polite. "Yes," I said, managing a small smile. "Emma Carter." "Amelia Hayes," she said, not bothering to return the smile. She tried to keep up. Noted. Amelia was not here to make friends. The conference room was massive, with a long, glossy table that looked like it could double as a runway. Designers and executives filled the seats, and the energy in the room was electric, like everyone was waiting for something big. I found a spot near the back, grateful to be out of Amelia's immediate line of fire. As I settled into my seat, a man in a sharp gray suit stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "Good morning, team," he began, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Before we dive into today's agenda, I want to take a moment to introduce someone very important." The room fell silent, every head turning toward the door. My heart did a little flip-flop, and I wasn't sure why. And now, without further ado, the man behind Reed International's success, the reason we're all here today, please welcome our CEO, Alexander Reed. I froze. Surely I'd misheard, or maybe it was a coincidence. Reed was a common enough name, right? It couldn't possibly be. But then the door opened, and there he was. Alex. The same Alex I'd spent last night tangled up with, the same Alex who'd kissed me like I was the only person in the world, the same Alex who was now standing at the head of the table, looking like he'd stepped out of a corporate fashion ad. For a moment I thought I was imagining it, but then his eyes found mine, and the flicker of recognition in his gaze told me I wasn't hallucinating. His expression didn't change, calm, composed, every inch the powerful CEO, but there was something in the way his mouth twitched, like he was holding back a smirk. I, on the other hand, was not so composed. My brain was stuck in a feedback loop of, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." "Thank you for the warm welcome," Alex said, his voice smooth and commanding. "I'm excited about the direction this company is heading, and I know we have the talent in this room to make great things happen." He glanced around the table, his gaze lingering on me for just a second too long before moving on. My cheeks burned, and I sank lower in my seat, praying no one had noticed. Amelia leaned toward me, her tone dripping with faux curiosity. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Something wrong?" "Nope," I squeaked, my voice at least an octave higher than usual. "All good?" She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning her attention back to Alex, who was now outlining the company's vision for the upcoming quarter. I tried to focus on his words, but my mind was spinning. What were the odds? Of all the CEOs in New York, I had to stumble into his penthouse. And now he was my boss? The moment Alex's gaze landed on mine, the rest of the room disappeared. For one agonizingly long second, it was just the two of us, locked in a silent exchange that screamed, "What the hell are you doing here?" His expression didn't falter, still calm, polished, every bit the commanding CEO. But there was a flicker in his eyes, a tiny crack in the mask that only I seemed to notice. It said, "Oh, you're here too." I, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as composed. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure the entire room could hear it. I clutched my pen like it was a lifeline, trying to look anywhere but at him. But my eyes betrayed me, darting back to him like a magnet drawn to steel. His lips twitched, just barely, like he was suppressing a smile, the kind of smile that said, "This is going to be interesting." Oh no, it's not, I thought, my panic mounting. This is going to be a disaster. "Emma!" The voice snapped me out of my spiral, and I turned to find Amelia leaning slightly toward me, her perfectly arched brow raised. I asked, realizing too late that I'd missed whatever she'd just said. "I said," she repeated slowly, like I was a toddler who needed extra coaching, "do you have any input on the design schedule, or are you too busy daydreaming?" My cheeks flamed, and I glanced down at my empty notebook. "Oh, no. I mean, yes, I agree with whatever the team decides." Amelia smirked, clearly satisfied with my flustered response. "Good to know you're so adaptable." The tension between us thickened as she turned back to the table, her perfectly straight ponytail swishing like it had its own attitude. Great. Day one, and I'd already made an enemy. To make matters worse, Alex chose that exact moment to speak again. "Emma Carter, isn't it?" My stomach dropped. His voice was casual, professional, but there was an unmistakable note of mischief hiding underneath. I swallowed hard and forced a smile, even as the entire room turned to look at me. "Yes, that's me." "I hear you're new to the team," he said, his gaze steady. "Welcome to Reed International. I'm looking forward to seeing what you bring to the table." There it was again, that tiny almost smile that only I could decode. To everyone else, he was being a supportive CEO. To me, it felt like an inside joke. "Thank you," I managed, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse was anything but. "I'm excited to get started." His gaze lingered a beat longer than necessary before he moved on, addressing the room with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Meanwhile, I stared down at my notebook, pretending to take notes while my mind screamed, "What just happened?" As the meeting wrapped up, I felt Amelia's eyes on me, sharp and calculating. I could almost hear her internal monologue. Why did the CEO single out the new girl? And why does she look like she's hiding a secret? I needed to squash this, fast. When everyone stood to leave, I made a beeline for the door, hoping to escape unnoticed. But Amelia, of course, wasn't about to let that happen. "Interesting," she said, falling into step beside me. I glanced at her, my heart sinking. "What is?" "The way he looked at you," she said, her tone light but laced with curiosity. "I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never seen him take an interest in a junior designer before." My stomach twisted, but I forced a laugh. "I think you're imagining things. He was just being polite." She said, her gaze sharp. "If you say so." She didn't press further, but the look she gave me as she walked away made it clear. Amelia was suspicious, and I was officially on her radar. I exhaled sharply, clutching my portfolio like it could shield me from her scrutiny. This was exactly what I'd wanted to avoid. Attention, speculation, drama. I'd come here to build a career, not to become the subject of office gossip. I glanced back at the conference room, where Alex was still speaking with a group of executives. For a moment, I let myself look at him. Really look. The sharp suit, the easy confidence, the way he commanded the room with just his presence. He was magnetic, no doubt about it. And last night, I'd seen a side of him that most people probably never got to see. A side that made my chest ache just thinking about it. But that was then, and this was now. He was my boss, I was his employee. Whatever had happened between us, whatever connection I thought we'd shared, it didn't matter. I straightened my shoulders, determination settling over me like armor. I'd worked too hard to get here to let anything or anyone derail me. "Keep it professional, Emma," I told myself firmly. "No distractions, no complications." And as I headed to my desk, I couldn't help but hope that Alex Reed had the same idea. Chapter 2. The Heat. The morning had started with the usual hum of activity at Reed International Headquarters. Keyboards clacking, voices murmuring over coffee, and Amelia Hayes breezing past my desk like she was on a runway. I'd been quietly working on a mood board when Alex's voice interrupted the steady rhythm of the office. "Emma," he said from across the open workspace, his voice smooth and commanding. "Can you step into the conference room for a moment?" My stomach did a somersault, but I nodded, quickly gathering my notebook like a dutiful student called to the principal's office. As I passed Amelia, her eyes flicked to mine, narrowing in what I could only describe as subtle disdain. Lovely. The conference room was all glass and chrome, with the Manhattan skyline stretching out behind Alex like his personal backdrop. He stood at the head of the table, his tailored suit crisp and effortless, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair closest to him. I sat, trying to ignore the way my pulse sped up when he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine like I was the only person in the room. "I've been looking over your portfolio," he started, flipping through a sleek folder in front of him. "Your work is bold, original, exactly the kind of perspective we need on this project." I blinked. Project? He slid a document across the table toward me. "The new collection we're debuting next quarter. It's high stakes, our largest launch in years. I want you to lead the concept development." My mouth opened, but no words came out. Me? Lead? On a major collection? Somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny version of myself was doing cartwheels. Wow, I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. I mean, I won't let you down." He smiled, and for a split second, the professional mask slipped, replaced by something softer. "I know you won't." For the rest of the day, I threw myself into the project with everything I had. My desk was a chaotic explosion of fabric swatches, sketches, and color palettes. Every time someone passed by, they'd stop to peek, offering murmurs of approval or polite nods. It was the kind of creative frenzy I lived for. But then there was Alex. He didn't hover. Oh no, that would have been too obvious. Instead, he'd pass by my desk every so often, pausing just long enough to glance at my work and offer a quiet, "Good progress," or "I like where you're going with that." It was maddening. Not because he was wrong, his feedback was always spot on, but because every time he leaned over my shoulder or held my gaze for a second too long, my brain turned to mush. The worst part? I was hyper aware of him at all times. Whether he was in a meeting across the office or grabbing coffee in the break room, I could feel his presence like a magnetic pull. Amelia didn't miss a thing. "You're working awfully hard," she said as she sauntered over to my desk, her tone dripping with faux sweetness. "Trying to impress someone?" I didn't look up. "I'm trying to impress everyone," I replied, sketching a bold neckline onto a gown design. "It's kind of the point, isn't it?" She laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "Well, good luck with that. Just remember, this industry doesn't have room for mistakes." Her words stung, but I pushed them aside. I wasn't here to get into petty rivalries. I was here to prove that I belonged, and no amount of side-eye from Amelia or lingering glances from Alex was going to distract me, or so I told myself. Later that evening, as the office emptied out, Alex stopped by my desk one last time. "Don't work too late," he said, his voice low and just for me. I glanced up at him, my pencil frozen mid-sketch. "Is that an order, Mr. Reed?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "It's a suggestion. You're going to do great, Emma." And just like that, he walked away, leaving me staring after him like a lovesick teenager. "Professional," I reminded myself, shaking my head. "Keep it professional." But as I packed up my things and headed home, his words replayed in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder, Was I imagining the way his gaze lingered, or was there something more to it? It started with the sound of heels, sharp, precise clicks against the polished office floor. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Amelia Hayes had a way of announcing her presence without saying a word. I sat at my desk, hunched over a sketch pad, a mess of fabric swatches and color palettes spread around me like the aftermath of a design tornado. The concept for the new collection was finally starting to take shape. Bold, romantic, and unapologetically unique, or at least that's what I told myself. "Interesting choice," came Amelia's voice, dripping with polite venom. I glanced up to find her leaning against my desk, her arms crossed, a carefully arched brow aimed at my latest sketch. She looked impeccable as always, her blazer sharp enough to cut glass. "Thanks," I said cautiously, unsure if it was a compliment or a prelude to something worse. She tilted her head, studying the design, a fitted evening gown with a cascading ombre of deep reds and golds. "It's daring," she said, dragging the word out like she was debating whether it belonged in her vocabulary. "Daring can be good," I offered, my grip tightening on the pencil in my hand. "It can," she agreed, tapping her perfectly manicured nail on the edge of my sketch pad. "But it can also be risky. Sometimes less is more, especially in a collection as high profile as this one." I swallowed the retort bubbling in my throat. This wasn't my first rodeo with subtle workplace sabotage, and I wasn't about to let her rattle me. "I appreciate the feedback," I said, forcing a smile. "But I think this direction aligns with the vision Alex outlined for the collection." Her expression didn't falter, but I caught the flicker of something in her eyes at the mention of Alex's name. Was that jealousy? Annoyance? Both? "Of course," she said smoothly. "But just a word of advice. When you're working on a project this big, every detail matters. A single misstep could overshadow everything else." Translation: don't screw this up. I nodded, keeping my face neutral even as doubt began to creep in. "I'll keep that in mind." "Good," she said, flashing a smile so polished it could have been part of her skincare routine. "I'll be interested to see how it turns out." With that, she turned on her heel and strutted away, leaving a trail of designer perfume and thinly veiled criticism in her wake. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at my sketch. It had felt right, exciting, even when I first put pencil to paper. But now, Amelia's words lingered in my head like a stubborn stain. A single misstep could overshadow everything. What if she was right? What if my design was too bold, too risky? What if I was pushing too far, too fast? I shook my head, trying to clear the spiral of doubt. This was what she wanted, to get under my skin, to make me question myself, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I glanced at the clock, realizing I still had time to tweak the design before the next review meeting. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my pencil and got back to work. This collection was my chance to prove myself, and I wasn't about to let anyone, Amelia Hayes included, stand in my way. The office was unusually quiet for midday. Most of the team had dispersed to the break room or their desks, leaving me at my station surrounded by a collage of sketches, fabric swatches, and crumpled up paper that hadn't made the cut. I stared at my latest design, a bold asymmetric gown in deep emerald, trying to block out Amelia's voice echoing in my head. A single misstep could overshadow everything. I bit my lip, the pencil in my hand hovering above the page. Was it too much? Too ambitious? Was I setting myself up for failure? "Emma," a voice said behind me, low and calm, like it wasn't about to send my heart into overdrive. I turned, trying not to let my surprise show. Alex stood a few feet away, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other holding a cup of coffee. His tie was slightly loosened, and the faintest shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, giving him a rare, almost casual air. "Oh, hi," I said, pushing my chair back awkwardly. Is everything okay?" His eyes scanned my desk, landing on the gown sketch. "May I?" I nodded, and he stepped closer, picking up the sketch with deliberate care. I held my breath, trying to read his expression. "This is strong," he said after a moment, his eyes still on the design. "It's bold, confident. It makes a statement." I blinked, certain I hadn't heard him correctly. "You think so?" He looked up, his gaze steady. "I know so. But," Amelia said. "Amelia has her perspective," he cut in, setting the sketch down gently. "But this is yours. And it's good, Emma. Don't let anyone make you second-guess that." His words settled over me like a warm blanket, quieting the storm of doubt that had been brewing in my chest. "Thank you," I said softly, meeting his eyes. His lips curved into a faint smile, one that made it very hard to focus. "You don't need to thank me for recognizing talent. Just keep trusting yourself." For a second, the air between us felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't quite name. His gaze lingered just long enough to make my cheeks warm, and I glanced down at my desk, hoping he wouldn't notice. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I should let you get back to it." "Right," I said, forcing a small laugh. "Wouldn't want to keep the creative genius waiting." He chuckled, the sound soft and disarming. "Genius? Now you're just trying to butter me up." I smirked, feeling a tiny spark of confidence return. "Is it working?" His smile widened, and for a moment I thought he might say something else, but then he stepped back, his polished CEO demeanor slipping back into place. "You'll do great, Emma," he said, his voice quieter this time, almost like a promise. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my sketch, my thoughts, and the growing realization that ignoring my feelings for Alex was going to be a lot harder than I'd anticipated. The party was a blend of polished sophistication and forced small talk, the kind of networking event where everyone sipped cocktails with one hand and clutched business cards in the other. I hovered near the bar nursing a glass of sparkling water because my nerves couldn't handle anything stronger. The room buzzed with chatter, but I couldn't focus. My mind was still tangled in fabric swatches and the relentless voice of Amelia Hayes whispering, "What if you fail?" "Let me guess," a familiar voice said from behind me. "You're here for the conversation and not the free drinks." I turned, and there he was, Alex Reed, looking every bit the part of the billionaire CEO in a perfectly tailored suit. His tie was slightly loosened, giving him an air of casual authority, and his trademark smirk was firmly in place. "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Although I'm starting to think I missed the memo about bringing business cards. Everyone else seems to have one. "Don't worry," he said, leaning slightly closer, his voice dipping just enough to make my pulse quicken. "I'm pretty sure you're the most interesting person in this room, business cards or not." I laughed, a little too loudly, and immediately wanted to sink into the floor. "Well, that's a bold assumption. You don't even know what I do for fun." "True," he said, his smirk softening into something more genuine. "But I'm willing to bet it's not standing in the corner avoiding eye contact." I raised an eyebrow. "You're awfully confident for someone who doesn't know me." "Confident?" he repeated, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Or just observant?" Before I could respond, someone called his name from across the room. A senior executive who looked like he wanted to discuss something very boring and very important. Alex's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, his eyes sparkling with unspoken mischief. "Stay out of trouble, Emma," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Then, with a nod, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there wondering how someone could be so infuriatingly charming. I'd barely had time to regroup when the party spilled onto the rooftop terrace, the Manhattan skyline stretching out like a glittering promise. I found a quieter spot near the edge, letting the cool night air clear my head. "Planning your escape?" Alex's voice cut through the quiet. I turned to find him standing a few feet away, his hands casually in his pockets. There was something different about him now, a relaxed energy that didn't quite fit the polished CEO image. "Not exactly," I said, raising my glass. "Just enjoying the view." He stepped closer, his gaze shifting from the skyline to me. "It's a good one. Are you always this smooth, or is it a special skill you bring out at company parties?" I teased, trying to ignore the way my stomach flipped under his gaze. He laughed softly, leaning against the railing beside me. "I don't think anyone's accused me of being smooth before. Intimidating, maybe. Occasionally charming if I'm lucky." "Lucky?" I raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as someone who needs luck." He tilted his head, considering me. "And you don't strike me as someone who gives herself enough credit." That caught me off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've seen your work, Emma," he said simply, "and I know talent when I see it." The sincerity in his voice sent a ripple of warmth through me, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. Instead, I focused on the city lights below. What about you?" I asked finally. What's it like running all this?" I gestured vaguely at the towering building behind us, the embodiment of his success. "It's a lot," he admitted, surprising me with his honesty. "Most days it feels like there aren't enough hours to get everything done. And then there's the pressure. People depending on you, expecting you to have all the answers. That sounds exhausting," I said, my voice softening. He glanced at me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that I hadn't seen before. "It is, but it's worth it. At least, I hope it is." We stood there for a while, the silence between us comfortable, almost companionable. The sharp edges of the party below felt a million miles away, replaced by something softer, quieter. "What are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I think you get it," he said, his eyes holding mine. "The drive, the ambition, the fear that maybe, no matter how hard you work, it won't be enough." I swallowed hard, the honesty in his words hitting closer to home than I wanted to admit. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I get it." For a moment I thought he might say something else, but instead he just smiled. A small, almost wistful smile that made my chest ache. "Let's make a deal," he said, breaking the silence. "You keep proving Amelia wrong, and I'll try not to scare off the rest of the company with my charm." "Deal," I said, laughing softly. And just like that, the moment shifted. The vulnerability was still there, but so was something else, something warm and undeniable, bubbling just beneath the surface. The hum of the city below provided a soft, constant soundtrack as Alex leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the glittering skyline. I'd never seen him this still before, like he was trying to lose himself in the view. "It's not as glamorous as it looks, you know," he said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter now, thoughtful in a way that caught me off guard. "Running a company like this?" I raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of my champagne. "I don't know. Private jets, designer suits, a penthouse overlooking Manhattan. Sounds pretty glamorous to me." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's the surface, the part everyone sees. But underneath, it's a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations." "Expectations?" I prompted, genuinely curious. I wasn't used to seeing this side of him, the guarded, polished CEO, peeling back a layer to reveal something vulnerable. He turned to me, his expression softer now, almost wistful. People think when you get to the top, everything gets easier, but it doesn't. If anything, it gets harder. Everyone's watching, waiting for you to slip up. Every decision feels like it could either make or break the company. I frowned, swirling my glass absently. That sounds exhausting. It is, he admitted, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, but it's worth it. At least that's what I tell myself on the bad days. I studied him for a moment, the way his shoulders seemed just a little too tense, the way his eyes lingered on the city like he was searching for something. For all his confidence and charm, there was something undeniably lonely about him. "You ever think about stepping back?" I asked, half joking. "Taking a break? Maybe finding a less stressful job?" His laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Every day, but stepping back isn't really an option, not when people are counting on you, not when you've worked this hard to build something." "Sounds like a lot of responsibility," I said, my voice quieter now. He nodded, his gaze distant. "It is, but it's also a choice, and I made it knowing what it would cost." There was something in the way he said it, something that made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something, to tell him it was okay to let go, to not carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, letting the silence stretch between us. The moment hung heavy in the air, charged with something unspoken. I felt it in the way he looked at me, his eyes searching mine like he was waiting for me to say something, to break the tension. "Alex," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah?" he asked, his gaze never wavering. I hesitated, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. There was a pull between us, undeniable and magnetic, but it scared me. He was my boss, and this, whatever this was, felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. I took a step back, forcing a small, shaky smile. I should probably head back inside. I'm sure Amelia's already wondering why I'm not mingling. His expression flickered, just for a moment, before the mask of the polished CEO slid back into place. "Of course," he said, his tone even. "Wouldn't want to give her more to gossip about." I winced at the edge in his words, but he didn't push. Instead, he straightened, his usual confidence slipping back into his posture like a well-worn suit. "Emma," he said as I turned to leave. I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. "Yeah. Don't let her get to you," he said softly. "You're better than that, and you're better than her." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache, but I couldn't let myself linger. Not tonight. Not with everything already so complicated. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely steady. "Good night, Alex." "Good night, Emma." I walked back inside, the noise of the party swallowing me whole. But even as I mingled and smiled and nodded politely, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, or the way my heart had wanted to stay on that rooftop just a little longer. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey so far, but trust me, the story is far from over. The twists, the revelations, and the emotions are only just beginning to unravel. You don't want to miss what happens next. It's where the narrative truly comes alive. Continue this adventure seamlessly by heading to the next part of the audiobook, where the story deepens and the stakes get even higher. Click the link in the description to dive straight in. Don't wait. Your next chapter awaits, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it. Chapter 3: The Conflict. If there was one thing Amelia Hayes excelled at, besides wearing designer blazers that probably cost more than my rent, it was making an entrance. The sound of her heels clicking against the polished office floor was like a warning siren. "Brace yourself, Emma." I glanced up from my desk just in time to see her saunter past, her sleek ponytail swishing like she'd practiced it in the mirror. She didn't look at me. Amelia never wasted a glance on people she considered beneath her. But when she reached Alex's office door, her entire demeanor changed. Her smile softened, her posture shifted, and she knocked with just the right amount of dainty charm. I rolled my eyes. Subtlety was not her strong suit. Alex's deep, steady voice answered from the other side, and I watched as Amelia slipped inside, closing the door behind. A tiny, irrational part of me wondered what they were talking about. Work, obviously. Probably something important and above my pay grade. And yet, the way she tilted her head when she spoke to him, the way her laughter carried through the glass walls. It was all too deliberate, too calculated. Amelia had returned to the design floor by lunchtime, her usual air of superiority cranked up to 11. She flipped through a portfolio at her desk, her lips curving into a smirk as she caught me watching. "Emma," she said, her voice saccharine sweet. "I heard you're presenting your concept for the new collection this afternoon. Big day for you." I blinked, surprised she was even addressing me. "It is." "Well, I hope you're ready," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Alex has high expectations for this project. He's not one to tolerate mediocrity." The way she said it made my stomach twist. I forced a tight smile. "Thanks for the advice, Amelia. I'll keep that in mind." She gave a little shrug, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name. "Just trying to help. Help, right?" Amelia's version of help usually involved a knife and someone's back. I didn't trust her, but I didn't have time to worry about her motives. I had a presentation to prepare. By the time I entered the conference room, my nerves were jangling like loose change in a pocket. The team was already seated, Alex at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through his tablet. I took a deep breath, clutching my portfolio like a shield as I set up the projector. "This better be good," Amelia said from her seat near the front, her tone light but her words pointed. I ignored her, focusing on the slides I'd spent the last week perfecting. Everything was in place. The colors, the designs, the presentation flow. I'd checked it all 3 times before arriving. There was no room for error. At least, that's what I thought. "Whenever you're ready," Alex said, his voice steady but not unkind. I nodded, clicking to the first slide. The title popped up on the screen, crisp and bold, and I began my introduction, explaining the inspiration behind the collection. My confidence grew with each word, the nervous tremor in my voice fading as I settled into the rhythm. And then it happened. I clicked to the next slide, expecting to see my carefully curated concept board. Instead, the screen flashed bright pink with a giant glittering Comic Sans message. "I love unicorns." The room went silent. I blinked, certain I was hallucinating. That's not. I clicked to the next slide, but it only got worse. My sketches were replaced with random clip art of cats in bow ties, followed by what looked like a blurry meme of a dancing banana. Laughter rippled through the room, quiet at first but quickly growing. My face burned as I frantically clicked back and forth, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. This wasn't my presentation. It wasn't even close. "Is this a joke?" someone whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "No," I stammered, my voice shaky. This isn't right. Something must..." "Enough," Alex said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The room fell silent as he stood, his gaze sharp and commanding. "Let's take a 5-minute break while Emma sorts this out." He didn't look angry exactly, but there was something in his expression that made my stomach turn. Disappointment, frustration, I couldn't tell. As the team filed out, Amelia passed me with a slow, satisfied smile. "Tough break," she murmured, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Better luck next time." It hit me then, like a slap to the face. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was her. She'd sabotaged me, and she'd done it so flawlessly that no one else seemed to notice. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling beneath my humiliation. I didn't know how, but I was going to fix this, and I wasn't going to let Amelia win. I stormed back to the design floor, my heels clicking against the polished tiles with a determination that even surprised me. My hands were still trembling from the disaster that had been my presentation, but the anger bubbling beneath the surface drowned out the humiliation. I spotted Amelia at her desk, her posture annoyingly perfect as she typed away, looking as serene as if she hadn't just tanked my career. She glanced up as I approached, her expression morphing into something that vaguely resembled amusement. "Emma," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Everything okay? You looked a little flustered back there." "Cut the act, Amelia, we both know what you did." Her perfectly arched brow lifted in faux innocence. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" "The presentation," I snapped, keeping my voice low enough that the rest of the floor wouldn't hear. "The glittering unicorns, the dancing bananas, ringing any bells?" She leaned back in her chair, a slow, condescending smile spreading across her face. "Emma, I have no idea what you're implying. Maybe you should have double-checked your files before walking into a meeting that important." I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it completely. "I don't know what your problem is with me, but I'm not going anywhere. I earned my spot here, and no amount of sabotage is going to change that." Her smile faltered for just a second, a flicker of annoyance breaking through her perfect facade. "Sabotage," she repeated, her tone icy. "That's a bold accusation." "It's not an accusation," I said, straightening up. "It's the truth. And if you think I'm going to let you walk all over me, think again." I turned on my heel and walked away before she could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I'd won that round, but at least I'd stood my ground. I was halfway to my desk when Alex's voice rang out across the floor. "Emma, can I see you in my office?" The entire room seemed to freeze. Conversations died mid-sentence, and every head turned in my direction. Great, exactly what I needed, more attention. I swallowed hard and nodded, following him toward his office. As we passed Amelia, she gave me a look that could have melted steel. If I hadn't been so furious, I might have enjoyed it. Once we were inside, Alex closed the door, leaning against it with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, and for a second, I wondered if he was about to fire me. "I know what happened," he said, his voice calm but firm. I blinked, caught off guard. "You do?" He nodded. "Amelia's little stunt didn't go unnoticed. I've already spoken to IT. They're looking into the file tampering." My shoulders sagged with relief, but it was short-lived. "So, what happens now?" "Now," he said, his gaze softening slightly, "we fix this. Reschedule the presentation, get your actual concept in front of the team, and as for Amelia, I'll handle her." The way he said it left no room for argument, but it also made my stomach twist. "You're going to confront her?" "She crossed a line," he said simply. "And I don't tolerate that kind of behavior." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache, but it also made me nervous. I could already hear the whispers starting, the murmurs about favoritism, about why the CEO was defending the new junior designer. "Alex," I started, my voice hesitant. "You don't have to." "I do." He interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "This isn't just about you, Emma. It's about setting a precedent. I won't let anyone undermine my team, no matter who they are." There was no point arguing with him, so I nodded, a small, shaky smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you." His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between us, before he straightened and opened the door. "Let's get back to work." When I returned to my desk, the atmosphere on the floor was different, colder. I could feel the weight of my colleagues' eyes on me, their whispered conversations stopping whenever I came near. "Did you hear? Alex defended her in the meeting," someone murmured as I passed. "I mean, she's talented, but still seems a little personal, don't you think?" My chest tightened, the sting of their words sharper than I'd expected. I'd known this would happen, of course. Office gossip was inevitable, especially in a place as competitive as Reed International. But knowing didn't make it easier. Amelia, of course, was basking in the attention. She sat at her desk like a queen on a throne, her smug smile practically daring me to say something. But I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on my work, determined to prove that I was here because of my talent, not because of Alex's intervention. I ignored the whispers, the sideways glances, the tension that seemed to thicken the air every time I entered the room. But even as I threw myself into the project, a small, nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me forget the way Alex had looked at me in his office, the quiet intensity in his eyes, the way he'd said my name like it meant something. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which scared me more, the office gossip, or the possibility that they might be right. The office had finally emptied out, leaving only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant buzz of a vacuum cleaner somewhere down the hall. I'd been pacing in front of Alex's office for at least 5 minutes, debating whether or not I should knock. This is a terrible idea, I thought for the millionth time. But I couldn't keep ignoring the elephant in the room, or the fact that the elephant had my name written all over it. I took a deep breath, straightened my blazer, and knocked. 3 firm taps, no hesitation. "Come in," his voice called, calm and steady as always. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Alex was sitting behind his desk, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened just enough to make my stomach flip. He looked up from his tablet, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of surprise in his expression. "Emma," he said, setting the tablet down, "what can I do for you?" I shut the door behind me, feeling the weight of the words I was about to say. "We need to talk." His brow furrowed slightly, but he gestured to the chair across from him. "All right. What's on your mind?" I didn't sit. Instead, I stood in front of his desk, arms crossed, trying to channel every ounce of confidence I didn't feel. "There's a problem, Alex." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Go on." "The rumors," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I'd planned. The whispers, the looks, the constant speculation about us. It's getting out of hand. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. "I'm aware." "Then why aren't you doing anything about it?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to walk into that office every day and feel like everyone is questioning whether I deserve to be here?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, let's not pretend this isn't partially your fault," I interrupted, my frustration boiling over. "You're the CEO, Alex. People notice when you defend me, when you look at me the way you do." His eyes narrowed slightly. "And how exactly do I look at you, Emma?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "You know what I mean?" I said, my voice quieter now. He stood then, rounding the desk until he was standing just a few feet away. The air between us felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. "Emma," he said, his voice softer, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "Do you think I don't notice it too? The way they look at us? The rumors? Then why?" "Because I can't help it," he cut in, his words rushing out like he'd been holding them in for too long. "I can't help the way I feel about you." The room went silent. I blinked, sure I'd misheard him. "What?" He let out a soft, almost bitter laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "You think this is easy for me? Pretending I don't notice you every time you walk into a room? Trying to act like I don't care when I see Amelia tearing you down?" My breath hitched, my mind spinning. "Alex, you're my boss." "I know," he said, his voice quieter now. Trust me, I know. But that doesn't change the fact that he stopped himself, his jaw tightening as if he couldn't bring himself to say the rest. I stepped back, shaking my head. This isn't fair. To either of us. Emma, he started, his tone almost pleading. No, I said firmly, cutting him off. You can't just say things like that and expect everything to be fine. There's a power imbalance here, Alex. You're the CEO and I'm me. He frowned, his gaze searching mine. You're not just you, Emma. You're talented, driven, and you've more than earned your place here. Maybe, I said, my voice shaking. But that doesn't change the fact that people will always assume I'm here because of you. And I can't let that define me. He looked at me then, his expression a mix of frustration and something softer, something that made my chest ache. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I admitted, the weight of the situation settling over me like a heavy cloak. But I do know that whatever this is, it can't happen. Not here. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally he nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. You're right. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Thank you for understanding. He nodded again, but the look in his eyes said this was far from over. And as I left his office, my heart heavier than ever, I couldn't help but wonder if walking away from him would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to do. I sat at my desk, staring at the resignation email I'd drafted and redrafted at least 5 times. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen in that limbo between action and doubt. The cursor blinked back at me like it had something to say. This is the right choice, I told myself. But my chest felt heavy, like I'd just stuffed my heart into my carry-on luggage and handed it to TSA. Across the office, the usual hum of activity carried on like nothing had happened, like my world wasn't about to change forever. Amelia was at her desk, scrolling through her phone with a smirk that made me want to toss a stapler in her general direction. My other colleagues barely noticed me as they buzzed around, too caught up in their own deadlines and coffee breaks to sense the quiet storm brewing at my desk. Taking a deep breath, I hit send. There. It was done. I felt a pang of regret immediately, but I shoved it aside, standing up with more confidence than I felt. If I was going to walk away, I was going to do it with my head held high, not like some defeated junior designer sneaking out the back door. With my resignation email sent to HR, the next step was the hard one, telling Alex. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like the slowest descent into doom I'd ever experienced. My palms were sweaty, my heart thundering like I was about to face a firing squad instead of my boss. And maybe something more than my boss, though I refused to dwell on that. When I reached his office, the door was ajar, and I could see him at his desk, sleeves rolled up, fingers flying across his keyboard. He looked tired. The confident, unshakable Alex Reed looked like he'd spent the night wrestling with the weight of the world. I knocked softly, and his head snapped up, his expression flickering from surprise to something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe? Hope? Emma, he said, standing as I stepped inside. Is everything okay? I closed the door behind me and squared my shoulders. We need to talk. His brow furrowed, but he gestured to the chair across from his desk. All right, what's going on? I didn't sit. Instead, I placed the printed resignation letter on his desk, sliding it toward him. What's this? He asked, his tone cautious. My resignation, I said, forcing the words out before I lost my nerve. His eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at the paper like it was written in another language. You're resigning? Yes, I said firmly, even as my voice wavered. I've thought about this a lot, Alex, and it's the right decision for me. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. Why? I sighed, my hands twisting together in front of me. Because I can't keep doing this. The rumors, the whispers, they're not going to stop. And no matter how hard I work, no matter what I accomplish here, people are always going to think I'm only here because of you. That's not true, he said, his voice low but insistent. You're here because you're talented, Emma. Because you've earned it. Maybe you believe that, I I said, my voice softening. But they don't. And honestly, Alex, I'm not sure I can either. Not as long as this I gestured between us, my throat tightening is hanging over me. He flinched just slightly, like my words had landed a direct hit. I need to prove to myself that I can do this on my own, I continued, my chest aching with every word. That I can build my career without anyone questioning how I got there. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. He didn't speak, didn't move, and I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing down on me. Please understand, I said quietly, my voice breaking just a little. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, and when he opened them again, there was something raw in his expression. I understand, he said, his voice tight, but that doesn't mean I'm okay with it. I walked out of his office before he could say anything else, my steps quick and deliberate. I didn't trust myself to linger, to give him a chance to change my mind or worse, to make me doubt the decision I'd already made. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, and as I descended to the lobby, the weight of what I'd just done started to settle over me. My chest felt hollow, my throat tight, but I told myself it was for the best. This was the right choice. Back in his office, Alex stood by the window, his hands shoved into his pockets as he stared out at the city. The resignation letter sat on his desk, unread, like he couldn't bring himself to face the reality of what it meant. He should have felt angry, or relieved, or something definitive. But instead, all he felt was a deep, gnawing regret. He'd tried to keep things professional, to maintain the distance he knew was necessary, but somewhere along the way, he'd failed. And now, the consequences of his choices were staring him in the face in the form of an empty chair where Emma used to sit. For the first time in a long time, Alex Reed, the man who always had a plan, always knew the next move, didn't know what to do. Chapter 4, Falling Action. When I first opened the doors to Carter's studio, the sign hadn't even been hung yet. Just a simple decal on the window that read design with heart and soft, looping script. But even with the unfinished edges, it felt like magic. My space, my vision. The studio was small but perfect, bright white walls, adorned with mood boards, tables stacked with fabric swatches and sketches, and the soft hum of a sewing machine that had already become my favorite sound. A cozy corner was set up with a love seat and a coffee table for consultations, complete with a vase of fresh peonies Kit had brought in as a good luck charm. The first weeks were a whirlwind. Clients trickled in, some drawn by word of mouth, others by the modest portfolio I'd painstakingly built during my time at Reed International. The buzz grew quickly, and before I knew it, my designs were being whispered about at boutique openings and featured in glossy blogs under headlines like "the next big thing in fashion." I couldn't help but smile as I stood in the middle of the studio one afternoon, surrounded by my team, a handful of eager assistants, each one as passionate as I was. We were finalizing a wedding collection, soft ivory pieces with bold accents, when Kit burst in, her arms overflowing with celebratory cupcakes. "You're officially famous," she declared, balancing the box precariously as she plopped it onto the worktable. I raised an eyebrow. Famous? Last I checked, I'm still riding the subway. "Don't be modest," she chided, pulling out her phone and waving it in my face. "You're on style now. Front page. Look." I squinted at the screen, and sure enough, there it was. A glowing feature on Carter's studio, complete with photos of my designs, and an annoyingly flattering write-up. "Okay, that's kind of amazing," I admitted, my cheeks warming. "It's more than amazing, babe," Kit said, throwing her arm around my shoulders. "It's proof that you're killing it. You built this all on your own, and now the world knows it." We celebrated that night in the way only Kit and I knew how. Takeout dumplings and a bottle of Prosecco in the middle of my studio. The smell of soy sauce mingled with the faint floral scent of peonies as we perched on the love seat, our legs tucked under us like teenagers at a sleepover. "To Carter's studio," Kit said, holding up her plastic cup of bubbly. "And to you, Emma Carter, the queen of all things chic and fabulous." I clinked my cup against hers, laughing. And to you, Kit DeLuca the Queen. Finding Prosecco that's actually drinkable on a budget. Cheers to that, she said, taking a dramatic sip. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the glow of the city lights streaming through the window. I traced the rim of my cup, the weight of the past few months settling over me. I didn't think I could do it, I admitted, my voice softer now. When I left Reed International, I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice. Part of me thought I'd fail. Kit nudged me with her elbow. And now look at you. Not only did you succeed, but you're thriving. You didn't just prove them wrong, you proved yourself right. I smiled, but the ache in my chest hadn't completely faded. Kit, of course, noticed. She always did. And hey, she added, her voice gentler now. Just because you're killing it professionally doesn't mean you have to shut yourself off from everything else. I raised an eyebrow. Everything else. Love, Emma, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You can have both, you know. Success and happiness. You deserve both. I looked down at my cup, the bubbles fizzing quietly. It's not that simple. It is, she insisted, her tone firm. You just have to let it be. I didn't respond, but her words lingered long after the Prosecco was gone, and the city lights had faded into the night. By the time the last client of the day left, a soft hush fell over Carter Studio. The sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, casting warm golden light across the sketches pinned to my inspiration wall. The faint hum of the city drifted through the slightly cracked window, but inside, the quiet felt sacred like a pause between breaths. I dropped into my chair, letting out a long sigh and kicking off my heels. My feet thanked me immediately. The day had been a whirlwind as usual, but a good kind of whirlwind. A my dreams are actually coming true kind of whirlwind. My gaze wandered to the framed newspaper clipping hanging near the door, the headline bold and gleaming. Carter Studio, a fresh voice in luxury fashion. Beneath it was a photo of me standing in front of the studio, holding a bundle of fabric like it was a prize bouquet. I still couldn't believe it was real. I spun my chair slowly, letting my eyes drift over the space I'd built from scratch. Every detail, the clean white walls, the sturdy worktables, the colorful chaos of swatches and sketches felt like an extension of me. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was mine. I did this. The thought hit me with surprising force, bringing a lump to my throat. For years, I'd been the girl who doubted herself, who second-guessed every decision, who let other people's opinions hold her back. But now I was the girl who'd taken a leap and landed on her feet. I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest as a small, satisfied smile tugged at my lips. Sure, I still had moments of doubt, nights where I lay awake wondering if I was good enough, if this was sustainable, but those moments were fewer and farther between now. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I was worthy. I wasn't chasing validation. I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone but me. And damn, it felt good. Reed International's boardroom buzzed with an unusual energy. Alex Reed, ever the polished CEO, stood at the head of the sleek, glass table, his sleeves rolled up, a rare sight that immediately commanded attention. This wasn't a typical meeting, and everyone in the room knew it. As of today, Alex began, his voice steady but tinged with determination. We're implementing a new employee well-being initiative. The room stilled. Some executives exchanged cautious glances, while others leaned forward, intrigued. Alex gestured to the projection on the screen behind him, a bold header that read, "The Human-Centered Workplace, Prioritizing People." For too long, Alex continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. This company has operated under the belief that results are all that matter. But we've forgotten something fundamental: our people are our greatest asset. If we don't support them, we're failing. Period. A murmur rippled through the room, but Alex wasn't finished. He clicked to the next slide, which outlined a series of changes: increased maternity and paternity leave, flexible work options, and a mental health support program. These aren't just buzzwords, Alex said firmly. his eyes locking with each person in turn. These are commitments. Effective immediately. Philip Stuckey, the ever-prickly COO, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. And how do you propose we balance this with maintaining profitability? Alex didn't flinch. By recognizing that a happy, supported team is more productive. This isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about building a company that thrives long-term. If you have an issue with that, Philip, we can discuss it after the meeting. The room fell silent, every eye on Philip, as his mouth snapped shut. Alex's tone had left no room for debate. The meeting ended with quiet nods and shuffling papers, but the energy in the room was undeniable. Things were changing at Reed International, and Alex Reed was leading the charge. Later that evening, Alex found himself in a quieter corner of the boardroom, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. The room was empty now, the hum of voices and clinking glasses from the networking event filtering in from the hallway. Impressive, came a familiar voice behind him. Alex turned to find James Morse, his mentor and moral compass, leaning casually against the doorframe. The older man's weathered face broke into a smile as he approached. "James," Alex said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I wasn't planning on it," James admitted, pouring himself a glass of water from the sideboard. "But I heard about your little presentation. Figured I'd see for myself if the rumors were true." "Rumors?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. James grinned. "That Alex Reed, king of the bottom line, has a heart after all." Alex huffed a laugh, running a hand through his hair. "I wouldn't go that far." James stepped closer, his expression softening. "Don't sell yourself short, Alex. What you did today, that was big. It's not easy making changes like that, especially when people like Philip are breathing down your neck." Alex shrugged, his gaze drifting back to the skyline. "It just felt necessary. Like something I should have done a long time ago." James studied him for a moment, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain junior designer, would it?" Alex's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Emma's made me see things differently. About the company. About myself." "She's got a good head on her shoulders," James said, his voice thoughtful. "You'd do well to listen to her." Alex nodded, his chest tightening at the memory of her walking out of his office, resignation in hand. "I just wish I'd realized it sooner." James clapped a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "The important thing is that you've realized it now. And if I know Emma, and I think I do, she'll see the changes you're making. People like her don't ignore growth, Alex." Alex glanced at him, a small flicker of hope breaking through the heaviness in his chest. "You think so?" James smiled. "I know so." The penthouse was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of Alex's fingers against the edge of his glass coffee table. He stared at the folder spread open in front of him, a meticulously organized portfolio filled with Emma's work. Every sketch, every swatch, every detail screamed her passion and creativity, and it was a stark reminder of what he'd lost. Alex leaned back in his chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. For someone who'd built an empire on confidence and control, he felt neither of those things right now. "Get it together, Reed," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. But getting it together was easier said than done. For weeks, he'd told himself that letting Emma go was the right thing to do, the noble choice. She deserved space to shine on her own, to build her career without his shadow looming over her. And she had. Carter's studio was thriving, and the fashion world was buzzing about her bold, refreshing designs. But every time he saw her name in a headline or caught a glimpse of her in a photo, that familiar ache settled in his chest, the kind of ache that didn't go away with time. Alex stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. The Manhattan skyline stretched out before him, a sea of glittering lights that used to fill him with pride. Now it just felt hollow. What was the point of all this success if he couldn't share it with her? He grabbed his phone from the coffee table, scrolling through his contacts until her name appeared. Just seeing it made his pulse quicken. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. Not yet. Instead, he turned back to his desk, where a single envelope sat waiting. Inside was an invitation to a design showcase, Emma's design showcase. "Stop overthinking it," he muttered, grabbing the envelope and tucking it into his jacket pocket. In the days leading up to the event, Alex threw himself into preparation. He wasn't just attending to admire her work, he was going to make things right. Step 1 had been overhauling Reed International's policies, something he'd been meaning to do for years, but hadn't found the courage to prioritize. Step 2 was more personal, rebuilding the connection he'd let slip through his fingers. "Are you sure about this?" James asked during one of their late-night conversations. Alex nodded, his jaw set with determination. "If I don't do this now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." James gave him a small, knowing smile. "Good. Just remember, it's not about grand gestures or big speeches. It's about being honest, even if it scares the hell out of you." Alex smirked. Terrifying honesty. Got it. As the day of the showcase approached, Alex found himself rehearsing what he'd say to Emma. Every version felt wrong, too rehearsed, too stiff, too not him. When the night finally arrived, Alex adjusted his tie in the mirror, staring at his reflection with a mix of resolve and nerves. This was it, his second chance. "Don't mess it up," he told himself before heading out the door. Chapter 5. The Resolution. Showcase night was a blur of silk, sequins, and strategically applied lip gloss. The room buzzed with energy, the kind that made you feel like the center of the universe for just one night. My designs floated down the runway one by one, each piece a fragment of my soul stitched together with needle and thread. I stood near the back of the room, clutching a glass of champagne I didn't trust myself to drink. My team was scattered around, mingling with clients, journalists, and a few suspiciously fashionable influencers. The applause after each model's walk was like a shot of adrenaline to my veins, but I couldn't quite shake the bundle of nerves twisting in my stomach. "Emma, you're glowing." Kit bounded up to me, her curls bouncing as wildly as her excitement. "This is incredible. Look at them, they're eating it up." I smiled, but before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the hum of the crowd, like the opening note of a symphony. "Of course they're eating it up. It's brilliant." I froze, my heart doing a strange, unwelcome flip. No, it couldn't be. Slowly I turned, and there he was, Alex Reed, standing in the middle of my showcase, looking every bit as devastatingly handsome as I remembered. His tailored suit was charcoal gray, a subtle nod to sophistication, but it was the way he looked at me that made my knees wobble like I was the only person in the room. "Alex," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, and it was softer than I expected, almost hesitant. "Hello, Emma." Kit glanced between us, her eyebrows shooting up like she'd just stumbled into the juiciest rom-com moment of the decade. "I'll, let you two talk," she said, disappearing into the crowd faster than I thought possible. I turned back to Alex, my mind racing as I tried to come up with anything that didn't make me sound like a bumbling idiot. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his voice teasing. "But it's pretty obvious. You're owning the room." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow. "That doesn't answer my question." He chuckled, and for a moment, the tension between us softened. "I'm here because I couldn't stay away. I've seen the headlines, Emma. I've read the articles. But seeing it in person, it's something else." My chest tightened, a mixture of pride and wariness swirling inside me. "You've been keeping tabs on me?" "Guilty," he admitted, his tone light but his eyes sincere. "But can you blame me? You've built something extraordinary." For a moment I didn't know what to say. The man who had once been the source of so much confusion and heartache was now standing here, showering me with praise. And the worst part, I wanted to believe him. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice softer now. "That means a lot." His smile widened, and for a second, the confident CEO persona slipped, revealing something gentler underneath. "You deserve it, Emma. All of it." The weight of his words settled over me, and I found myself standing a little taller. I had done this. I had proven to myself and the world that I was more than capable. But as much as I appreciated his praise, there was still a part of me that couldn't forget the past. "Why now, Alex?" I asked, my tone firmer. "Why come here tonight?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because I needed to see it for myself. And because I needed to tell you I was wrong." "Wrong?" I repeated, my heart thudding in my chest. "About everything," he said simply. "About how I handled things. About not fighting for you when I should have. I let you go because I thought it was the right thing to do, but all I did was prove how much I needed you." The room around us seemed to fade as his words hung in the air. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at him and wonder if I was ready to hear what came next. I stared at Alex, the hum of the showcase around us fading into white noise. My chest felt tight, like my heart couldn't decide whether to race or stop entirely. He looked at me with a mix of determination and vulnerability I wasn't used to seeing from him. Alex Reed, the unshakable CEO, looked unguarded. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the kind you rehearse or say just to make things easier, but the kind you mean from the bottom of your soul." I blinked, caught between wanting to laugh at the dramatic tone and feeling my chest squeeze at the sheer weight of his words. "That's quite the opening line," I said, crossing my arms. "You sure you don't want to practice it on someone else first?" He huffed a laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Trust me, you're the only person I want to say this to, and I don't deserve to practice. I just need you to hear me out." I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "I'm listening." He exhaled, like he was gearing up for something monumental. "I messed up, Emma. When you walked away from Reed International, I told myself it was for the best. That I was doing the noble thing, giving you space to grow on your own. But the truth is, I let my fear get in the way. I was scared of what I felt for you, scared of crossing lines I wasn't sure I should cross." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my pulse skip. "But I see now that I wasn't just scared. I was selfish. I wanted to protect myself more than I wanted to fight for you, and I hate that I put you in a position where you felt like walking away was your only option." His words hit like tiny arrows, each one striking closer to the truth than I was ready to admit. "Alex, no, let me finish," he said, stepping closer. "Because this isn't just about apologizing. This is about you knowing that I see you. I see the brilliance in your work, the passion in everything you do, and the strength it took for you to leave when it would have been easier to stay. You've built something incredible, Emma, and it's all because of who you are, not because of me, not because of anyone else. Just you." His voice softened then, his expression shifting into something even more vulnerable. "But I want you to know that I see it now. And I see how much I need you, not as someone on my team, not as someone I can protect, but as someone I love." The last word hung in the air, heavy and raw, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. Love. He'd said it so simply, like it was a fact he'd been carrying around forever, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. And yet, it didn't feel rehearsed or calculated. It felt real. I crossed my arms tighter, more out of self-defense than anything else. "You love me," I repeated, testing the words out loud like they were foreign to me. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "I love you, Emma, and not in a way that's convenient or easy. I love you in a way that scares the hell out of me because it's the kind of love that makes everything else feel less important." I swallowed hard, the sincerity in his voice tugging at something deep in my chest. But I wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. "You think one heartfelt speech is going to make me forget everything? The rumors, the power dynamics, the way I felt like I had to fight just to prove I belonged?" He flinched, but he didn't look away. "No. I don't expect you to forget. I don't expect anything, Emma. I just needed you to know how I feel. And to know that I've changed." I raised an eyebrow. "Changed how?" "Oui. Reed International isn't the same company it was when you left," he said. "I've made changes, real ones. Policies that support employees, prioritize creativity, and make sure no one feels the way you did. It's not perfect, and it won't erase what happened, but it's a start. My heart softened just a fraction, but I wasn't about to let him see it. And what about us? What happens if I say no? If I decide this isn't enough? Then I'll respect that, he said quietly. I'll walk away, and I'll do everything I can to be better, whether you're in my life or not. But I hope you'll give me a chance to prove I'm worth it. The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside me. This wasn't the polished, confident Alex Reed I'd known before. This was someone who had faced his flaws and was willing to fight for something bigger than himself. I hesitated, my mind racing through every reason why this was a bad idea. But then I really looked at him, and saw a man who was willing to meet me as an equal, not a boss or a protector, but as a partner. And for the first time, I wondered if just maybe he deserved that chance. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him. The confident, polished CEO was gone, replaced by a man who stood there completely open, vulnerable, and waiting. It wasn't just the words he'd said, it was the way he'd said them. Like he was bearing a part of himself he hadn't shown anyone else. I don't know if I can promise anything perfect, I said finally, my voice quieter now. But if we really do this, it has to be on equal footing. No power plays, no running away when things get hard. Just us. He nodded, his jaw tightening slightly as he held my gaze. Us sounds good to me. A smile tugged at the corners of my lips despite myself. Then I guess we start fresh. His eyes lit up, the tension in his shoulders melting away. Fresh, he repeated, stepping closer. I like the sound of that. Before I could say anything else, he leaned in, his hands gently cupping my face. And just like that, the world fell away. His lips were warm and insistent, a perfect mix of passion and tenderness that left me breathless. I forgot where we were, forgot about the people around us, forgot about everything but him. That is, until the sound of clapping and cheering jolted me back to reality. We broke apart, our eyes wide as we turned toward the source of the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the runway, clients, designers, and a handful of models still in their gowns. Kit was front and center, clapping like a maniac and grinning from ear to ear. About time, she yelled, earning a round of laughter from the crowd. My face burned hotter than the sun as I buried it in Alex's shoulder. Oh my God, this is mortifying, I mumbled. He laughed, the deep, warm sound rumbling against my cheek. Mortifying? I think it's perfect. Perfect. I pulled back, raising an eyebrow. We just turned my showcase into a rom-com finale. And they loved it, he said, his grin unstoppable. Just like I love you. The crowd erupted in another wave of cheers and applause as he kissed me again, and this time, I let myself get lost in the moment. If the world wanted a show, we were giving them the grand finale. A week later, Reed International's annual corporate gala was in full swing. The room was filled with New York's finest sleek suits, glittering dresses, and an air of opulence that screamed we're all wildly successful. I'd been hesitant to come, but Alex had insisted, promising me it would be worth it. And now I knew why. I stepped into the grand ballroom, my hand in Alex's, and immediately spotted her. Amelia Hayes, standing near the bar, her gown shimmering under the chandelier lights. She was surrounded by a group of executives, her laughter a little too loud as she leaned toward Alex's direction. Showtime, Alex murmured under his breath, a hint of amusement in his tone. We made our way through the crowd, and as we got closer, Amelia's eyes landed on Alex and then on me. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Quickly recovering, she stepped forward, her eyes lighting up as she addressed Alex. Alex, she purred, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. I was hoping to catch you tonight. You've been so hard to pin down lately. I've been busy, Alex said, his tone polite but distant. Well, I hope you're not too busy to enjoy the evening, she said, placing a hand on his arm. Maybe we can find a quieter corner before she could finish. I stepped in, pulling Alex down for a kiss that left no room for interpretation. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a statement to this man is mine kind of kiss. When we finally broke apart, the room had gone eerily quiet. Alex turned back to Amelia, his hand still resting firmly on my waist. Amelia, I'd like you to meet Emma Carter, my girlfriend. Amelia blinked, her perfectly manicured mask cracking just enough for me to see the disbelief in her eyes. Your girlfriend? That's right, Alex said, his voice steady and confident. Emma's not just brilliant, she's the most important person in my life. I smiled sweetly at Amelia, fighting the urge to say something snarky. Instead, I simply held out my hand. Nice to officially meet you, Amelia. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it, her grip tighter than necessary. Likewise, she said through gritted teeth. The moment stretched awkwardly before Alex leaned down to whisper in my ear. Want to dance? Absolutely, I said, taking his hand as we left Amelia standing there, her jaw tight and her eyes shooting daggers. As Alex twirled me across the dance floor, I couldn't help but laugh. That was satisfying, I admitted. I thought you'd enjoy it, he said, pulling me closer. But for the record, I would have done it even if she hadn't been here. I looked up at him, my chest swelling with something warm and undeniable. I know, I said softly. And that's why it's perfect. The music swelled around us, the city lights twinkling through the ballroom windows like something out of a dream. And as Alex dipped me low, his eyes locked on mine, I realized that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales weren't so far-fetched after all.